Okay. And then I'm gonna connect to doing the live stream on Facebook. But while I'm doing that, do you have anything you want to share and just how things are doing?
Things are doing good.
Doing.
They're doing what they do. And what did we do? We had a major event of manicuring the cows' hooves. Shamala in particular, that was exciting and successful, and ultimately, so that's good. And what else? Today's a rainy day here. Surprise. Probably the last rain for 6 months. We're having a drought here in Mendocino County. Emergency for the state. Of course, we have a well, so hopefully it will hold up. It was a very dry, comparatively, winter. And so while that has its advantages, it has its disadvantages. We'll see how it affects us going forward. It won't be the first time that this has happened, but otherwise, tomorrow we're on again, right?
Yeah.
Holiday Rasa Yatra, which could be nice. And publishing projects are going forward. At a good pace, a lot to do, a lot of kind of infrastructure work going on to set up the press in all respects. And my book is going forward. The last section of the 3 sections is now being edited, so making good progress. So why don't we go ahead and take the questions?
Sure. So Padmanabha Swami, do you want to, could you ask one of the questions from the Spanish speaking devotees?
Yes. Okay. Mm-hmm. Okay. Okay, the question is from Maturadas. Is that Maturadas from Argentina? Or Brazil? Brazil, yes. Okay, the question is about the what Maturadas is referred to as the Yugal mantra in the Nimbarka Sampradaya, Radhe Sham, Sham Sham, Radhe Radhe, etc. If I could say something about that and about the worldview, the metaphysic, Beta Bade, it's termed, of the Nimbarka Sampradaya in relation to the Beta Bade, Achintya Beta Bade of Gaudiya Vaishnavism. He said that he couldn't find much differences except the word Achintya. And so he wondered if I could elaborate on that. I think that's the whole question. And in response, I think that the Nam Yugal mantra, as Maturdas referred to it, is not one that we find anywhere in the greater body of the scriptural corpus, the sacred texts. Unlike the Hare Krishna Mahamantra that Chaitanya Mahaprabhu is said to have asked his disciples to chant, and his disciples have written about him, describing him chanting that mantra. For example, Rupa Goswami's verses, Chaitanyastakam, describe him chanting the Mahamantra on his way from Navadvip to Puri. And many other examples there. Chaitanya Bhagavad, Vrindavan Das writes of how Chaitanya Mahaprabhu advised his disciples to chant this Mahamantra. So unlike the Nam mantra that Maturdas is referred to and identified with the Nimbarka Sampradaya, the Hare Krishna Mahamantra is recommended by Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, is found in the scriptural corpus. It's found in the Upanishads, actually. And therein it is particularly recommended for Kali Yuga as the means of deliverance for Kali Yuga. Iti sodasakam namnam Kali Kalmasha Nashanam Sarva Vedeshu Drishyate. There Brahma reveals to Narada that this mantra, consisting of 16 syllables, he speaks it out, is efficacious for Kali Yuga. And all of the scriptures confirm this. So there are other texts, I think, believe the Agni Purana, maybe the Brahma Purana or another one, I'm not sure. Mahamantra is found there as well. So that's a significant difference between the two. And that said, the Nam mantra for the divine couple Radhe Shyam in the Nimbarka Sampradaya really only speaks about Madhurya Rasa, whereas the Hare Krishna mantra is broader in its reach, and it can be embraced by devotees of any spiritual ideal, whether it be Dasya, Sakya, Vatsalya, Madhurya, even Shantarasa. It can be chanted with an understanding that corresponds with that ideal and be efficacious. So you can find, for example, people in the Ramanuja Sampradaya chanting it. I remember a temple in Kerala, I believe it was, South India, where they chanted the Hare Krishna mantra 24 hours a day. You can find that in the Ramanuja Sampradaya temple in Vrindavan, not the Rangaji temple, but one nearby that, where they also chant Mahamantra 24 hours a day. So it's broader in its reach, and at the same time, it is not lacking in terms of the depths of its reach. We find in the prayers to his guru, Raghunath Das Goswami says, Nama Shreshtam api Sachiputram Atra Swarupam. Nama Shreshtam api Sachiputram. The son Sachiputram, the son of Sachi, has given Nam Shreshtam. So that means the highest and deepest possible prospect found within the name. And of course, you can say name here refers to the Nam mantra. So it's not lacking, while it's greater in its breadth, it's not lacking in its depth. And in terms of its depth, it offers the prospect and the possibility for devotees to attain a service that is as close to, in terms of intimacy, to Krishna as one could get, as close as, who could get closer to that than Radha, and to attain her service, Radha Dasyam, is in Madhurya Rasa, is a particular form of Madhurya Rasa that is thought to be the preferred form by Rupa Goswami for this very reason, because by having direct union with Krishna in Gopi Bhav, one cannot get as close to Krishna as one can by serving and assisting Radha in getting close, having union with Krishna. That's the math, if you will, behind the ideal. So there's nothing lacking in the depth, and it arguably it exceeds the depth that's our thinking and in our sampradaya, why we choose it. For example, of course, it's also chosen us, but also not lacking in breadth. So for Kali Yuga, people of all persuasions, if they're Ram Bhaktas, if they're in pursue Sakya Rasa, Madhurya Rasa, Das Rasa, that may be the case, they can attain that by chanting the Hare Krishna Maha Mantra. The same breath is not there within the Yuga mantra as of the Nimbarka Sampradaya. With regard to their ideal Beta Bade, there's a big difference between the Beta Bade and the Chinti Beta Bade. So Chinti is not a small word; it's a big word in the narrative, in the worldview. And to be brief and get to the point here on this, the Beta Bade of Nimbarka Sampradaya, well, the Beta Bade, whether it be Beta Bade in the Nimbarka Sampradaya, whether it be a Chintu Beta Bade in the Gaudiya Sampradaya, whether it be Dvaita Bad of Madhva, whether it be what is Shankar's term? Shankar has a term, Shankaracharya, I should say, has a term, as Ramanuja does as well. All of these principal schools of Vedanta have a term by which they try to, Anirvachaniya, Shankaracharya, by which they try to harmonize the statements of the scriptures that say God is immanent and say God is transcendent, say that God is one and God is different. So how to harmonize these two opposites? So Shankar harmonizes them by saying, well, the difference is a relative thing. It's not there in the ultimate, and so on and so forth. So the term in Gaudiya Vaishnavism is achintya. Without going into the other sampradayas, I mentioned a little bit Shankar, but Nimbarka Sampradaya says, well, God is sometimes one and sometimes different. That's there. Sometimes one, sometimes different. Now, I'm just giving a very obviously brief explanation of the Nimbarka Sampradaya. You can read the commentary. I have the commentary of the Nimbarka Sampradaya on the Vedanta Sutra. There are some similarities to the Govinda Bhasha of our Sampradaya, Govinda Bhasha being the work of Baladeva Vibhushan. And understandably, I mean, this is a Ragmarg Sampradaya, Nimbarka Sampradaya like ours. They're prominent in Vrindavan, so on and so forth. But there's a big difference between saying God is one sometimes and different at other times, and saying he's one and different at the same time. And that's like, wait a minute, you didn't explain it. How can he be one and different at the same time? The oneness and the difference interpenetrating one another. Well, the Gaudiyas say this is this possible because God has Achinta Shakti. We're not trying to impose our intellect on the environment. We're just, that's what it says, that's what it's showing, so that's what it is. For example, okay, Krishna was seen by Yasoda to be outside of herself, sitting in her lap. When she looked in his mouth, she found herself inside of Krishna. So is Krishna outside of Yasoda or inside? Well, according to the Leela narrative of the Bhagavatam, it was both at the same time. And therefore, what is not possible and doesn't fit between the ears, so to speak, which we may try to reason about to make it sound more reasonable, the Gaudiya Vaishnavas say, don't bother with that. It is what it is. God has Achinta Shakti by which such things are possible. And that's not a kind of a logical cop-out, if you will, as some people might think, but it's giving its place to logic and putting logic in its place at the same time. So there's a big difference between, oh, well, I mean, he's sometimes one, sometimes different, say, no, he's one and different at the same time. And that's because he has inconceivable powers by which he does things that from our limited vantage point would be impossible. We can give some examples to try to explain, help us to understand it, like saying, well, in fire, there's heat and light. How can you have fire without heat and light? At the same time, heat and light are different from fire. They're one and they're different. We can give some examples to try to help us capture it with our intellect, to satisfy, to appease our intellect. But ultimately, the teaching is, fortunately, that the Absolute transcends the intellect and the ability to capture him entirely, ultimate reality, with our intellect. Now, it's not that other sampradayas saying you can capture him with their intellect. They don't say that either. But in different ways, they talk about that than we are today relative to the question. So I hope that helps. If you have a further question that comes from that I haven't addressed, or something else, a comment that comes to mind, please feel free to voice it either in the immediate or going forward here in the time that we have. Thank you for the question. I'll say one other thing, that Embarka Sampradaya is all about Madhurya Rasa. And it's so much about Madhurya Rasa that in its ideal, the attainment is such that one enters into a prakash, or a window of the eternal Leela. The Leela is like, when you get on one of these big super planes to fly to India, sometimes they have a little screen on the back of the seat in front of you, and then all the movies are playing at the same time, and you can like click a button to go to that one, click a button to go to that one. They're all playing at all. So all the Leelas of Krishna in the apricot are playing all the time. And so we have a particular window that we seek to enter into. We kind of stop the Leela as it plays out in this world, at the trailer, so to speak, of the movie of the eternal Leela. Just as Krishna's old enough to go to Mathura without going there. Stop. So Radhakunda has been developed, Ristasura has been slain. Really all of the assassins of Kamsa have been slain. Kamsa remains there as a distant person in the background, and the Leela is set up, Krishna is an adolescent, set up beautifully for Sakya and Madhurya Rasas to play out. That's the window that we want to enter into. Now and so in that Leela there is Dasya, there is Sakya, there's Atsalya, there's Madhurya, and there's movement, and so forth. The window in which the Nimbarka Sampradaya wants to enter is one of Saki Bhav, like to be a girlfriend of Krishna. There may be some ideas there for doing so in the context of serving Radha also, but not quite like ours. And they want only that window. So in that window they enter, there's only Sakis and Krishna. There's no Yasoda, there's no Nanda, there's no Subal, Sridham, and so forth. So there's like if you just capture a moment in that and play that out eternally, something like that. I may not be doing full justice to it, but that is their ideal. So it's a different window, if you will, and ours is much more attractive, of course, or so we feel, because we've had sadhusanga from Gaudiya Sampradaya, so we have some scars for that, feelings for that. All right, so much on that. Nimbarka Sampradaya ki jai. What other questions? Next question.
So I forgot to let you know how many questions there are. So there are 4 questions left.
Okay.
Sharda, could you ask your question?
Haribol, Hare Krishna, Maharaj, devotees. Hope you can hear me. I have a question. Hare Krishna. Balo. My question is, if a devotee has a sudden departure from his body, with not even a chance to utter the Lord's name or no outward indication of being a devotee, for example, tilak or beads, will the Lord or the Vishnu Dutas recognize that he is still a devotee due to his or her devotional service in his lifetime? I did read about the story of Ajamila in the Bhagavatam, and also there's apparently Lord Krishna welcoming a devotee here in an article. Apparently Gopa Kumara was a devotee who was welcomed by Lord Krishna, and the scene is described in the scripture Brihat Bhagavatamrita, which I've yet to read. But if you could say something about that, that would be welcome.
Yes. So there are outward symbols of the Sampradaya or different Sampradayas by which we identify ourselves as devotees of Krishna. Tilak, for example, we've given the Kuntimala, neck beads, and so forth. And I think that these have the purpose more of reminding us of who we are or who we want to be, or who we've made a commitment to be, who we're trying to be, if you will. Then they are signs that without which Krishna won't recognize us. It's maybe easier if we're wearing tilak. Sometimes we say things like that. If he's wearing tilak, then during the Artik, then he'll see you and recognize you. And Putana dressed like a devotee. She was not a devotee. She dressed like a devotee, but because she had the dress of devotee, Krishna accepted her as a devotee and gave her a status of it within Vatsalya Rasa. So in that sense, there's much to be said about dressing, even if your heart's not in the right place. But that's a statement that seeks to tell us how generous Krishna is, how blinded Krishna is by the love of his devotees. We see in the 9th chapter of the Gita how blind he is, but when he says "Apiched sudaracharo bhajate mamanandaba," even if my devotees act improperly, they're proper because they're my devotees. They're situated as my devotees. So he's such is his nature, and therefore no one in their right mind, we would say, Uddhava says, would take shelter of anybody else, any other form of divinity. But it's not that obviously that Krishna doesn't know the heart of someone and where we are in our spiritual evolution, if you will, is where we are, regardless of what we may be wearing. So let's say you're living your life as a devotee and so forth, but then you have to go to work and dress in a manner that's suitable for that occasion. And on the way, you suddenly have a heart attack and pass from the world. It's kind of your question, right? Uh-oh, he wasn't wearing tilak. She wasn't wearing neck beads visibly and so forth. That would have no consequence, really, because where you are is where you are. Where your heart is, where your Krishna spiritual consciousness has evolved to what point at that time in your life is where it is, and that's where you are. So wherever you are is, where you are. So if you've developed up to nishta, up to ruchi, up to prem, then that is what will carry with you, regardless of where you may go into another life, or it may take you into the lila, relative to the development. So it's thought that if one attains Swarup Siddhi in Bhava Bhakti, perfecting the Bhava Bhakti, then he or she will take birth in the lila of Krishna. But if one hasn't developed that far, however far they have developed, well, they'll pick up in the next life at that point. So where you are is where you are. Death is just a change of dress. It doesn't change the level, if you will, of your spiritual evolution. Death knowingly coming on by years, one who has lived a life as a devotee will think as they get older, well, time's running out here for this life. I knew it wasn't worth pursuing. Still, I tried every now and then to make more out of it than it is, but time for that's running out, practically speaking. So the advantage of that then passing or getting old and coming closer to the inevitable passing of the body is that if one has been trained in spiritual practice and so forth, then they can turn on, they may get negative impetus to turn on the step on the gas, so to speak, in terms of their practice and preoccupation. And similarly, at the time of death itself, this is a very big moment. Your whole life may flash before you at that time. So there is potential at that moment to make great spiritual advancement also. This is a little different than what you're asking about, but just as an aside. But that's it. Again, if you pass away undressed for the occasion, if you will, you're still invited to the party, so it's no problem. Come as you are. Come as you are. There's no other way to come. You have to come as you are. Hare Krishna. Okay, what else? Another question?
Yeah, Padmanabha Swami, could you ask the question from there?
I guess I should be asking all the questions, repeating them so that everyone can hear, huh? Or is that just the case for the Spanish questions?
I remember him saying that had something to do with Facebook. I don't quite understand. Archana, did you get that?
I cannot.
It's because on Facebook you cannot
Spanish.
hear the Spanish.
Just your questions? They can hear the other questions in English? Okay. Oh, okay. So the question for those who didn't hear it is about sharing the truth about something in particular, and the fact that everyone's not prepared to hear the truth. Everyone has a different, is in a different stage, so to speak. And so the question is how to draw the limits, if I understood the question correctly, in terms of who to tell the whole truth and nothing but the truth to, and who to tell maybe not, and so on and so forth. So I can't give you a formula that says, at this time do this, at this time do that, but this is the art, if you will, of sharing the truth, that you have to, if you were to be successful, you need to not just share the truth, but create teachable moments, not just teach someone, but create teachable moments, or wait for teachable moments to arrive, so to speak, to create some receptivity on the part of the person to whom you want to share something with. It's just like if you want to grow a mango, you have to make the soil first fertile. You have to till the soil, and you maybe have to add some amendments and so forth and so on. And then you can plant the seed. And after planting the seed, you have to water it also. So it's an art. And I think that if one is earnest about that, they can learn, by trial and error, so to speak. When you try to tell someone something they're not prepared to hear, even though it's true, then it definitely is the possibility to have a counter effect. So, so it's an art, and you have to be sensitive to the people. I think that you have to care really about them. If you want to, it's one thing to want to tell the truth. It's another thing to care about people and want them to actually imbibe the truth. So on any particular subject. I mean, obviously, sometimes people are obstinate, and in a public forum, you have to say something that's true that will alienate some people because they're whatever bigots or whatnot. But the greater public or group will be served by that. That's a different thing. So the Bhagavatam may speak about renunciation, for example, broadly, and everyone can read it. But then to personally talk to someone about renunciation, for just using this as an example, well, how much you're going to say about that, to what extent you should encourage them to renounce and so forth, is another thing. Yes, material attachments are the cause of suffering. That's true. But people aren't ready to just give up their material attachments. And if we were to force them to do so, well, they wouldn't be able to pursue the truth of that. So, for example, in the Gita, Krishna speaks about higher ideals, and then in the earlier chapters, and then he steps back and says, rather than gyan, do nishkam karma. That's better. It's lesser, but it's better. Something like that. So, preaching is an art. Telling people the truth is an art. I think that, again, if it's people that you're concerned about, they care about you. They know you care about them. If you establish a bond with them in that way, then you'll be in a better position to share something with them that may be somewhat unpalatable but true. Another question?
Kishore?
Pranam Gumaraj. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Good morning.
Good morning. So my question has to do with cultivating inner peace in the context of bhakti.
Good luck.
Thank you. The idea of inner peace, because of its close association with personal mukti, has sometimes been diminished in the Bhakti Marg, but it seems that in love, it's very intimately tied with devotion. So I was wondering if you could say something about what's the place for cultivating inner peace in the context of bhakti?
Okay, I think, Bob Numbers, you want to repeat that question in Spanish? Oh, okay. Okay. Mm-hmm. Okay. Okay. Well, it's an interesting question. And I think that I often say that we don't want just peace, we want peace and love. And while peace is a stillness, if you will, love is a movement. So we move in the world to find love. And when we find it, it has an orbit of its own. And that orbit may look as disconcerting, for example, as the movement based on unfulfillment, karmic movement in material life, but it's another species altogether. It's the movement of rasa. There, the separation is as blissful, if not more, than the union. And here, of course, the union is as bad as the separation. The two are similar but very different, similar in appearance, very different in substance. And in between the two, you have shanti, 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 peace. So I think that in pursuing divine love, we're pursuing a service ideal. And service need not be troublesome if you understand it properly. If you want peace, then service will be a disturbance. I've given an example before that Juan, who works for us there at Madhuvan, who was born on the land and from whose father we bought the land, coming to work one morning, he had been doing some digging, which was more difficult work, and I thought maybe I'll give him some easier, lighter work today. And I explained that to him. He said, "It doesn't matter. My business is to serve. It doesn't matter. My business is just to please you. You're el jefe aquí, so my business is just to please you. It doesn't matter what the work is." And so that was, materially speaking, a proper understanding of service. That was his dharma. That's what he did. He come to work, whatever the boss wanted, that's what we do today. And to fully embrace that and see that as he did. I used to, I ask him, "How's everything going?" He said, "By the grace of God, I've got work. Everything's good." So service misunderstood, I think, and seen as something to get done with so that I can sit and be peaceful, is not a, that approach is one in which you will lack peace in the pursuit of love, and you won't get the love either. So there is peace within the service ideal if we understand the service properly, if we really identify with it, which is easier said than done. Material life is about acquiring things or giving up things, bhoga, and Tyag. Those are the two tracks on which it runs, with which the path of karma and gyan correspond with. They are systematic approaches to acquire or to give up. Service, comes in between, right? We can accept and acquire if necessary for service, or we can give up if necessary for service. So where the lack of peace comes is from pursuing the acquisition or trying to get rid of things. So it's true, I should say, not trying to pursue things will make one peaceful. For example, in Gyan Marg, I guess we could say that's the ideal. But you won't have love, as we look at it in the full sense of the term. Very abstract form of love, that involves not taking, but the full idea of giving isn't realized in that. So you may attain peace by that, but there's a struggle to do it. So there's a struggle in pursuing the peace through gyan. Bhakti, properly understood, is not a struggle, so nobody understands it. You could say, or it's difficult to understand. But theoretically, service is not chasing after things, acquiring things, not trying to get away from anything either. So the problem is solved. Peace is within love. That said, I think that it's also important to know that, or to reflect on the fact that most of us have joined the mission of Gaudiya Vaishnavism because we wanted enlightenment. We wanted, we saw the prospect of making, finding enduring happiness in this world was dim at best. And so we became transcendentalists, and we probably identified with those who were examples in the history of the world who had attained shanti, peace, who had given up the world. We all romanticize to some extent with monasticism, to some extent, with Siddhartha. I did when I read Hermann Hesse's book many years ago. I thought, oh, that's what you want to do. So that shouldn't be forgotten. So now I'm making the case for the importance of inner peace, if you will. And it's possible, and it often happens, that I think in the name of pursuing Krishna consciousness, we get busy with things, for Krishna, if you will, that aren't bringing us inner peace. They become excuses for doing things that are within sadhana bhakti, that are important and that correspond with that which is done in other traditions where the goal is peace unto itself. So I see a lot of devotees become busy with things, often even in the name of preaching, let's say. And it's at the cost of actually sitting and actually doing one's japa as a yogi would do his or her meditation, as it should be done. And taking the time to apply oneself in a yogic kind of sense, if you will, to all of the practices that are inherently bhakti, that the mind is fully focused on them while one's doing them and so forth. And without that, you're not going to get the peace and you're not going to get the love, and you're going to be busy with so many things and thinking that I'm foregoing peace because I want love, therefore I'm taking this trouble to manage this organization, and it's even though it means I can't chant japa, and I've got so many disciples, I haven't got time for anything else. I've got to talk to her about this and him about that, and so on and so forth. The whole yogic sensibilities is just kind of like gone out the window, if you will. And you can look good to yourself, maybe to some others and so forth, and deceive yourself. But in the end, this is a yoga. And so there are whatever is there in schools of yoga that lead only to peace are within bhakti. They're applied differently and so forth, and I've discussed that a little bit. But I think it's important to remember this is remember what's important. To love Krishna, not just to be busy with something. Those things may be service, they may be important, there may be times for that, but often it's at the cost of really being reflective, introspective, and really seriously trying to harness, if you will, the mind, in particular while applying yourself to the practices of archan, of japa, kirtan, so on and so forth. So I would say that inner peace is quite important, and that one has to gauge one's engagement to some extent in terms of how it's working to foster tangible spiritual progress, and evaluate it. And that can all be adjusted, whether you want to have a big mission, or is that important, for example, or maybe not. So I hope that helps. It's kind of a long and extended answer, but it's something I've thought about. I don't know how well I've been able to articulate my thoughts, but I do see that that more often, unfortunately than not, what it means, what's required, what's involved from a yogic point of view in terms of being a transcendentalist and attaining a status above the modes, control the senses and the mind can be lost in the name of bhakti, not in bhakti, but in the name of bhakti, and just being busy. So, Shanti. What else?
Thank you very much.
Okay.
Me. I think it's another question from the Spanish-speaking devotees with Pavanabha Swami.
Okay. Mm-hmm. So the question for those who couldn't hear it is that sometimes it's said that some devotees may employ apasiddhanta for preaching reasons, and how much should neophytes do something like that? Do they have a license for that? If so, to what extent? Is that the question, Maharaj, accurately? Yeah, I think that there are some examples of this, what you speak about, and on the part of some prominent devotees. We see, and we see it in the scriptures also. The scriptures may advocate, for example, acquisition of something in pursuit of getting someone to do something, to sacrifice something. So if someone is too addicted to acquiring, then we can dangle a fruit in front of them and say, if you do this, which is giving up something, you can get that. And the goal is to get people to then begin to give up and sacrifice, and see that sacrificing makes progress, even if it means in terms of material acquisition. By sacrificing, I can get that, what I want. And so the bigger gain is some faith in sacrificing and giving up. So the scripture, in a broad sense, the whole canon of the whole entirety of the Hindus' sacred texts, looked at from a Gaudiya point of view. Even the Bhagavatam makes a statement like this in the 11th canto. Sometimes things are offered like this. Therefore, less intelligent people who don't see the futility of the pursuit of things. So we may tell them, encourage them to pursue things, but do it in this way. So, that's the art of sharing. So it is similar to the previous question of Annapurna, as Maharaj stated. Then, strictly within Gaudiya Vaishnavism, you have the idea that Jiva Goswami, in some of his books, posited the idea that Swakiya was the status of Radha and Krishna, that they were married in the apricot Leela, because the idea of God being adulterer, if you will, was difficult for people in his time and in his community to digest. So it's thought in the tradition that he spoke along those lines or wrote along those lines for some people to bring them in the fold. So it's an example. There are other examples as well. The Buddha is said to have overtly promoted the idea that there's no self. But a good argument can be made for the idea that that was not an ontological truth, but it was a pragmatic strategy that he employed in order to give impetus to persons to slay, if you will, the false self. Whether there's a real self, whether there's a God, that's not important. And you can look in the Pali Canon and you can find places where he actually does say there is a self and so forth. So some people have made the argument, Buddhists even, that this was a kind of a pragmatic preaching strategy of his, rather than an ontological position that he was taking with regard to the Atma. So there's Buddha as a Shakti-Vaishnava in our perspective, and here he is doing what you're talking about. There are some examples, perhaps in the Paribar of Bhaktivinoda. Bhaktivinoda was in a unique position, interfacing with the modern world, Western educated people, and so forth, looking at their sensibilities. Then their argument can be made that there was a couple of points of Siddhanta that he may have stretched or presented somewhat differently as a preaching strategy. His idea with regard to anadi karma would be an example of that. His emphasis there is nonetheless is the same as the conclusions of the scripture. For example, in the Gita, it says that the jivas are responsible for their karma, not God. So that's a whole big discussion unto itself, but that's an example. So your question is about such instances and how they apply to ourselves. Well, they don't apply to ourselves. So you don't have a license to do that. Only in a small sense, I guess you could say that if you're trying to talk to somebody and you fully understand where they're at and what they can digest and so forth, you may tell them something in a way that gets them involved that later they find out was something that you employed to get them involved, but there's more to the story, something like that. Otherwise, I would be very reticent to advise devotees to think that they can come up with some strategy for expanding Krishna consciousness that involves teaching something that's contradictory to the conclusions of our sampradaya. There's so much that can be done in terms of presenting the conclusions and learning them ourselves to help others get involved in Gaudiya Vaishnavism, that such preaching strategies are not required. Again, preaching it requires some strategy. You can only tell people so much and so forth, but I don't think that you have to tell them something that's, you don't have the license to do something like Swami did or Buddha did or something like that. So that's my answer, and that's our time, isn't it? Did they get all the questions today? Okay, good.
Yeah, there was one follow-up question, but it was from Ashamaraj, and he just said he could ask it next week.
Okay, well, I thank you all for your time, and I hope to be with you tomorrow for the Baladev Rasiyatra. Gaur Premanandi, Hari Bol.
Jai.
Bhaktivinoda ki jai.
Haribo.
Before everyone goes, I just want to make a few announcements. So as Gurudev just mentioned, there's going to be a class tomorrow. I think for Balaram Rasiyatra. So that's going to be at the same time. At the same time, I think, and then on this channel, not on the other channel with the other classes. So that's happening tomorrow. And then just to re-explain what's happening during the week. So on Tuesday, Ashamaraj will be giving his classes, and Dulal giving classes about Krishna Sandarbha. And on Thursdays, Gaur Sundar will be giving classes, the overview of Srimad Bhagavatam. And then, okay, so Fridays, Brigupad will be giving classes on Manashiksha, instructions for the mind. And then on Saturday, Bhakti Rasa will be giving her class. And then for the essence of the Bhagavad Gita. And then also on Saturday at 1 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, Gurudev's going to be on Nam Rasa's podcast, the late morning program, and I'm going to copy and paste information about that in the chat right now. And you can find your corresponding time for wherever you are. So it's not letting me do it. But that's also in the Sri Chaitanya Sangha group. Wait, let me see if I could just post it right here. Oh yeah, I think it's also in the email. Oh, it's Shamananda's classes. Okay, wait. Now Shamananda's classes on Saturday. Oh, because it's going into May. Right. Okay, that makes sense. I think, are there any other announcements that I'm missing? Yeah, I just mentioned that. Okay. Yeah. Okay.
Are
Okay,
you
I
done
got
with
it
your
then.
announcement?
Alrighty. Well, thank you everyone for
Can you guys
listening
hear?
and staying and the questions. Yeah. Okay. Haribo.